Welcome to episode 6 of Out of Bounds, a podcast giving different commentary on different issues in our society. And I'm your host, Terry. And today, right off the top, I want to say it's a very hot button, a very sensitive topic. But I think the very reason that it's a hot button topic is the reason we should talk about these things. I don't think, these conversations should be avoided. I think productive discussion, makes sense, but again, you just gotta realize that, you're not here to force somebody to your opinion. You really just bring in your point of view to the table with, the best explanation you have. Somebody brings their point of view with their best explanation. Maybe you learn a little more, but you can't expect somebody to change their mind, or that shouldn't really be the goal. I mean, we should all just be learning a little more. And again, as I said before, if we're not honest about these things and how we feel, how can we ever grow? So yeah, with that being said, I mean, who knows what the reaction will be, but I don't, condone and I won't tolerate any crazy comments or anything like that. 'Cause it's not about being disrespectful. It's about having discourse. So, the other thing I would say is that you gotta really define what we're talking about. It's easy to jump off into different topics, and this isn't really an all-encompassing episode. This is really just kind of talking about what's the concept of the new genders, what exactly that means, the framework behind it, and then just kind of my feelings on it and different things. And I'll be honest about my feelings as well. So there we go. So to start it off, I think the number one thing this boils down to is this discussion of sex versus gender, and sex being your biological makeup, determined by your chromosomes, by your reproductive organs, all of that good stuff. And so there's a lot of misinformation when it comes to the topic of transgendered, and the fact is that intersex was some people incorrectly use, but intersex is just really someone that is born with both parts of reproductive organs, and it is a very low percentage of the world population that is actually born that way, where we're talking about biology. And I'm not a foremost expert going forward on any of this. I'm not an expert on it, but that much I do know. I've read enough, listened to enough, and heard enough. That much I do know. So when we're talking about sex, we're talking about what are you born as? Well, your body parts. And the way this kind of all got started is this talk of gender. Now, there's people that pull gender apart from sex and say gender is more about what's constructed by society, and you hear the term gender roles. So gender as in what is expected of you based off your sex. Not based off anything else. And so, while some people talk as if gender roles, I don't know where they think it comes from, but it comes from based off your sex, what then you should do. And we know the history of that. Most of us should, where, there were times where, and there's still times now where people feel women should do certain things in the concept of a family and a household, and that men were meant to do certain things, dating back to the times where the hunter-gatherers and the men that go out and kill animals and bring food and protection, and women that take care of the house and the young as you have offspring. So that permeates through history to today. And a lot of that notions have been challenged as we've seen more media, more technology grow, and we get to see more things from around the world. But we also just have people and pioneers that push those boundaries, much like any other identity, whether we're talking about race or anything else. So from that, we get to a point where people basically say, and this is just me paraphrasing, that since we created what gender roles are supposed to be, what type of jobs, what type of characteristics they're supposed to have, and the same thing for men, since that was just made up by society, well then who's to say that we as a society can't make up new things? And that's kind of where we moved to now where we are, where people choose to identify as a certain gender, or they choose to specifically identify with a non-gender that is non-binary or not one of the two. So that's kind of the concept of what we're talking about. Now, within that, I feel the thing that gets lost the most in these conversations is how we use sex and gender. Again, gender is wrapped into in a product of your sex characteristic as a male or female. And so while people will use it almost as a semantic, I believe, to say, well, yes, I was born this way, but society labeled me this way. And so I'm choosing to change that societal label, if you will. Because the fact is, and if you boil it down to it, you can't change what you're born as. And to be very honest, that's what always caught me off guard from the very beginning. My first interaction with that was, I would say, around 2012 when I was in college. And I was a resident assistant in the residence halls. And during training, we had talks about providing specific rooms that were for transgendered people. And at the time, that wasn't the term we used. I forgot what it was, but essentially for people that were in transition, they were meant to live together. And of course, at the time, that seemed like the right move because there was a push to provide a space. And that was 6 years ago now, or 7 years ago now. And so we're at a point now where that's not really the proper move because that is kind of pointing people out, whereas you want to include them. So, but anyway, so I heard this and I was just confused about it because I think at that time I was very much thinking, okay, we're talking about cross dressers, right? Like men that dress as women or women that dress as men, or to that extent. And a lot of times it was just men dressing as women. It was like, okay, well, they feel like they identify or they feel like a woman, whatever. You feel like a woman. And so my mind goes back to, To Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything. If you ever saw that movie, back in the day, it's Wesley Snipes, John Leguizamo, and, why am I forgetting his name? Patrick Swayze from Roadhouse. And it's a movie starring those three. And honestly, I watched it so much as a kid, but I haven't watched it as an adult. I don't even know what the movie's about, but I know they were drag queens, or I don't think they ever were. I think they were always in drag. But anyway, I feel like seeing that as a kid might have normalized that a little bit for me, but still, as I said, I don't really know what it was. And so when they talked about providing these rooms, I was just like, okay. Now I didn't fight back, but in my mind in conversations, I'm like, this is stupid. Not that people wanted to dress like that or be that way or feel that way, but to me, it was stupid that we were providing specific rooms for them. And it's funny when we talk about, being politically correct or woke or any of that, is that it changes, because at that time, people would have went against me saying, how could you say something like that? When nowadays, my thoughts are the correct thoughts. It's like, you shouldn't single them out and give them their own specific room. But at the time, people did have fear of living with somebody that didn't understand. So that was my first introduction. And, of course, we went down the line, Caitlyn Jenner, all these things, right where we at. Cool. So I always felt, and what I still feel today, which I'll get into later, is that you can feel one way and identify as one way. I didn't really use the word identify. I know that's the big thing now, but I didn't really use identify, but I felt, I just thought you could see what was traditionally for a boy or traditionally for a girl or traditionally for black people, traditionally for Latino people, all these different things, and you could identify or feel closer to that. and you choose to live that lifestyle. And so for me, I always felt that was something that was possible. But when it came to this, I kind of felt that you have to come to terms with what it is. And at the time, I thought that was fine. I thought it was fine to, if you want to dress that way, you want to wear makeup, all these different things, you wanted to look like a woman. Honestly, I did, because you were living in your truth, so to speak. But then very quickly after college, it became a thing where now I want to change my name. Now I want to get a lot of plastic surgery to make myself actually look like a woman. Now I want people to refer to me as a woman and these different things. And then it snowballed to the point where we are now. And I just think it got a little out of touch with reality, because you can be born a male. And again, like I said, you identify with these lifestyles because that's what they are. If we can say gender is socially constructed and we can recognize all the characteristics that go with gender or different races and everything else is socially constructed. So it isn't, I'm born a guy, so I naturally have to like football. It's not, that's just what you see in TV and all these things. And you might like it, you might not, but it's your individual choice. So if we can just realize that these aren't inherent in the way we're born, but then come to terms as we grow up with what we like and what we don't like and choose to live that, then I was perfectly fine. It's then when we try to change reality, so to speak. So we get to the time today where now it's full-fledged new genders, meaning that I choose to identify one way, and the new thing or the big thing is pronouns. I want to be talked to, and I want to be addressed in that certain way. And there's a lot of talk about, well, how right is that? How wrong is that? And everything else. And I take it back to what I was just saying, where I could recognize somebody's feelings, and you always are a human being, but I don't know where we cross that line, because you're saying that you have to talk to me in the way that I feel is comfortable, that we created. And all words are created. All concepts are really created. They're made up, but there's certain things that are created for the structure of society, like laws and everything else. It isn't just humans making information simple, which we like to do. We like to put things in categories to make it easier to think about and less complex. There's part of that, but a bigger part of that is for the structure of society, male, female. You're born with those parts. Like, we could have called it any word in the book. It doesn't matter what the word is, but it's a way to say, okay, you were born this way, you were born that way. You have reproductive organs that can produce a baby by birth. You have reproductive organs that can produce a baby by insemination. And then that goes on to pretty much everything. It's our driver's license. It's, our social identifiers. It's everything. It's on, our applications, all that. So we structured it by that way. And some people say, well, that's the problem. But again, what is the alternative to that? If you break all that down in society, then you're talking about a lot of alternatives that would not even, have solutions for, that would really break down the structures. Now, some of those structures historically are used to keep people out. Much on the sex and gender conversation is the race conversation and the class conversation. So yes, I can recognize all of that, but also I can recognize that doesn't mean that we have to completely get rid of it. There has to be some type of structure, otherwise the world would be chaos. And so the male-female thing isn't just created specifically to box people in, but it is created as you root it back to the biology. And I recognize also that historically in other societies, the genders and pronouns have been different. I know that too, but we're talking about America and kind of in the topic of what we're talking about in our society. So that's what's been built on for the longest time. And so it isn't just a means to oppress, even though it has been used that way. And so again, we get back to this thing where if you feel you don't jive with that certain lifestyle, that's not who you are, then I can respect those feelings. Now, when you try to alter everybody else's reality, that's when my questions come up, because again, where do we draw that line? Because one day, again, as we talked about earlier, what's politically correct and acceptable changes. So one day you're saying you have to do X, Y, Z or I'm going to be disrespected. And the next day is you got to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And it's like, well, what's the line where we could tell people what they have to do to really, not offend me? And that worries me, because you get the intersection of not only this conversation, but the intersection of today's society, in which it's a fake offended, very offended, looking to be offended type world, where it isn't just, okay, I would like if you would address me this way, or I feel more comfortable this way. It's, how dare you say that that's not that person's pronouns, you're intolerant, you're a bigot, you're all these things. And you're talking about a lot of people that don't even know what this stuff is. We've been born and raised for a very long time with a certain level of meaning. Now, meaning and education and knowledge changes. We get that, but you don't flip the switch all of a sudden. We're in an instant gratification society. We're in an offended society where some people act like you just have to know it right now. And these are things that I've just learned within a year. And you still have people who come to you as, as if you should already be on board and you should know. And that it's okay for other people to tell you how you need to change up your vocabulary and thinking. And that's always going to be the case, whether it's this topic or a different topic, is how we approach these conversations. Because again, when you come at it from those confrontational angles and what feels like confrontation, then you're going to get pushback, backlash. And some people just look for a fight on both sides, and they're not really looking to gain anything. But again, if you come about it with, here's my perspective and what I think and why, and the same thing on the other side, then we could probably learn something new. And so it is one thing to introduce these new concepts and way of thinking that is very different than the rest of society has been in our existence here in America, and let that take time to build and teach and learn, versus just trying to tell everybody where they should be at and get with the program. And that's one thing that's always going to lose a lot of people, and then it's going to create enemies out of other people. But for me, again, I'm always going to respect everybody as a human being. There's some people that keep saying, well, you're saying that I don't exist. Well, no one's saying that. You exist. We see you. You're a human being. You have a right to all the human rights to be treated as such. But that doesn't give you the right to just change people's reality or tell them that they have to then change their reality to bend to your reality. Your reality is inside you feel whatever way you feel. But then to say that someone sees you a certain way, or that you are just born with just being correct, like scientifically correct, you were born as a female, as a woman, as a male, as a man, then to try to tell them that's not true, that's just false. I mean, it is what it is. And so I think there's that understanding where you gotta have time. Now, if somebody respects you, loves you as a friend, family, whatever it is, and they say it means something to me to work, to understand, and to get this right for you, that's fine. That's love. That's relationships. To expect everybody in the world to just have to give you that type of effort is crazy, to be honest, because it's one thing in a professional setting, in an educational setting, but you go out into the real world, there's a lot of people that don't care. Like people pull these power dynamics in areas where they can. When your colleagues and bosses and co-workers and classmates, you can do those type of things because you don't want to look a certain way in front of a group that has influence on you. But if you run across somebody you have no connection to, or they got nothing to lose, they don't have to listen to you. They don't have to treat you that way. They don't even have to call you by your regular name or me by my name. And so they could call you all types of things besides, a child of God. And that's just the fact. That's what the world is. So people acting as if they have this control, this entitlement to tell people how to think and address everyone is silly, especially when there's so many different new terms being created, some from very old times, but some being completely new, and people choosing to politically identify in different ways for different reasons, which again is your right and prerogative, but then to push that on everyone else to think that they should know and that they should be in line with it, I don't agree with. And so that's just kind of how it plays out in using it. But then down to its core, I don't really agree with the new genders either. I think that there are two genders. And again, that goes back to the way we use sex and gender and using semantics to peel gender apart and say, well, that's socially constructed, so we can change that. And people refute, or they don't refute the sex part because it's hard science is proven, like it's very factual. You have these type of organs as a female and you could birth a baby. A man can't push a baby out. So people tend not to refute those, but that's socially constructed too. I mean, it's us observing life and giving names to the information. But again, that's more hard science. And so people peeled apart the social part of it, the gender roles. Again, I think gender is very closely tied to sex. There are times where we're talking about gender roles, but for the by and large part, when you're talking to people, they use sex and gender interchangeably. And they always have. And so that's one of the reasons to me is very semantic and it's very tough to navigate trying to change that dynamic. Trying to say that, yes, I was born a female, but I identify as a man or identify as he, that just is not logical with our current way of thinking. And again, that can sound bad. And I agree that our way of thinking can change, but it takes time. You're talking about foundational knowledge, man, woman, female, male. And so I just think the semantics of it makes it messy. But then on top of that, to a psychological part, I personally feel that you have to own whatever it is your reality is. Because there's going to be the human part where we're humans and we should be treated with dignity, humanity, and the rights that come with that. But then there's the reality part of what you're born into. That's the social context. That's the historical context, all that. And so for me, one thing I think about being born as an African American person seen as black, there's very much a societal way and culture that is attributed to me. And so growing up thinking about some things that I used to like and really be into, and having people or my brothers or somebody else tell me, yeah, that's not what black people do. That's not black people music. That's not what black people eat. And this very idea of what black is. And at a young age, you don't have the sophistication and conversations and education to know how to break that apart. But as you grow up, if you look for that knowledge, then you can then come to terms with it and then understand that at the end of the day, yes, I'm African American or you call me black, but that does not mean that I'm in this box. That doesn't mean I can't go here. I can't do these things, especially legally when we're talking about laws. Those things don't exist anymore. And so I can make my reality and accept my reality as it is. And there's a lot more of that too. You just look at the nerd culture to pull it back even further, identity that's not inherent, and people accepting that becoming more popular, and people owning and championing that and saying that, yes, I'm into this and I'm okay with that. And I could take the consequence or backlash or unpopularity that comes with it, because I'm a grown person and I can make that distinction, and I can mentally be okay with my choices and my validation. But as I've talked about before, and we'll talk about again, we are in a society that lost that self-validation. And so when you're talking about other people validating you, when you're talking about not having the mental capacity to own up and reconcile with your own feelings, you do get things like this. Because you are born a man. You're not a woman. Or if you want to use correct terms, you're born a male. You're not a female. No matter what alterations you go through, for a transition, or no matter what pronouns you want to use or how you want to identify, that's not who you are. Now you say, I want to wear a dress, but typically a male isn't supposed to do that, so I identify as a woman. That's not true. You're not a woman. You can still wear that dress and be who you are. And you can own up to, again, those consequences that push back, that backlash, because it's outweighed by the benefits of how you feel and how you feel validated. But that's not what we're in this time. We're in a time where, okay, I'm going to change the whole identification up, and I'm going to look for other people to then validate it. And if they don't validate it, it's a confrontation about me calling you ignorant and whatever other names it is, and that you don't see me. You don't think I exist. We know you exist. And I recognize that there's people on one side that are just they're just there to be bigoted, discriminatory, and make it a fight. There's also other people on the other side that are just looking to pick a fight too. But then you got to recognize all the people in the middle who are just trying to understand each other and don't have the right communication too. So I'm not saying one side's bad, one side is good. What I am saying is that for me, in my personal opinion, I think it just goes back to owning, and it could be any identity under the sun. You have to own and reconcile with your own self those things. So if you are born on the south side of Chicago and you are African American and you love country music, that's your thing. But you feel like your reality tells you that you're not supposed to and that you can't. It's up to you to grow up and reconcile with those things and make the decision of how you're going to live your life. And I just think when we get to these identities, people don't. I don't think they do. And it feels kind of like a cop-out. And I personally would say that you have to come to terms with it. But even if you do decide that, okay, I'm going to identify this for more than just how I feel, maybe for political reasons, for whatever, then you don't have the right to then think everybody in the world has to follow along that line. So I think those are two things we deal with. And again, bouncing back to society, we lose that self-validation. We are quick to be offended, and things are just a catastrophe. Everything's the worst thing. Oh my, I can't believe you said that. I can't believe you didn't call me the right pronoun. I can't believe you said there's only two genders. And a lot of people in the backlash world we live in on reality, in society, where a lot of people are just, again, they're offended. How could you say that? And so everything goes from 0 to 100. Everything's black and white. Either you're with us or you're against us. You're good or you're bad. And I think a lot of this conversation about gender gets lost up in that. So, that's just kind of my opinion. I know that, a lot of people are going to have their different thoughts, and I appreciate them. I mean, for whatever people will feel about what I would say. I'm never saying anyone doesn't exist. I'm never saying anyone's not human. Never saying that your opinion isn't as valid as mine. I'm just talking from the way I see it and what I feel. So go to the comment section. Let me know about your thoughts on the new gender conversation. Spread around, get the positive conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe, and until next episode.